Disclaimer. This E0 Level 1 tier list is made with Level 1 skills and no potentials in mind. Furthermore, I have not used every operator, so some of these rankings are made using speculation rather than personal experience. Throughout my 1.5 years of playing E0 Level 1, I have been asked many times of my opinions on several operators, and I think it's about time that I make a full tier list. So I'm going to go through every single operator up until the Delicious and Dungeon collab that is happening on CN. And also so I can roast Dambo for never finishing his tier list. So to get things started, to clarify a few things, the unobtainable tier is all of the operators from Integrated Strategies and also the different classes for EMEA. And for the Integrated Strategies operators, even when you recruit them, they're always at least Elite 1, and then even using the different forms of EMEA, she is Elite 0 maximum level, and so they're unobtainable as Elite 0 level 1 operators. And as for the useless tier, as the saying goes, there are no bad operators, only bad doctors. Unfortunately, that doesn't really apply for Elite 0 level 1 because of how extreme the low stats can be. So there are some operators that I will never use under normal circumstances. So to get things started, let's start off with the Vanguards. And Vanguards have two different roles. They either get DP as fast as possible, or they stall the beginning enemies of a stage long enough to put down more powerful operators such as defenders that can tank those early units. So unfortunately, that means that almost all of the Pioneer Vanguards are going straight into the useless tier, with one exception. And I really hate to do this saga, but this has to be done. And that notable exception is Flametail. She has a faster charging skill compared to other Pioneer Vanguards, and she has a guaranteed dodge, so she is going into the D tier. And I am probably never going to rely on that guaranteed dodge, so you'll probably never see me use Flametail in a serious clear. But she just barely gets into the D tier. Well, actually, Loey, you used Pioneer Vanguards on WR-7.
Get out right now!
Yato, the non-Ultra version, she doesn't get her fast redeploy talent at level 1, so she is also useless. When it comes to Myrtle and Elysium, they are my go-to for getting DP, being flag bearers. When it comes to Myrtle, they are, well, both Myrtle and Elysium, they're going into the S tier. And I use Myrtle whenever a stage needs me to get off that first skill of a flag Vanguard as fast as possible, because she has the lowest SP cost. And Elysium, I prefer over Myrtle, because he has that higher defense, and his skill, I think, generates more DP over time, but there are times where I do use Myrtle instead. Now, next is Scylla, who is the more expensive and hotter version of Elysium, and I'm putting her into A tier. And because DP is by far my biggest issue when it comes to stages for Elite 0 level 1, which is kind of interesting because you would think that there would be a lot of complex things, but when it comes to how I play, pretty much as soon as I get my whole squad on the stage, that is pretty much the biggest problem that I have with when clearing these stages. So just one DP difference when it comes to Silik is enough to put her in A tier in comparison to Elysium, but her higher attack is sometimes useful. So she can be still good. When it comes to Wanqing, so I need to explain welfares. So you may not know, but welfare operators, they get -3 DP and minus deployment time of -10 seconds instead of the regular 6 seconds and -2 DP because of how welfare operators are. And because of that, if you don't get all the potentials, they are the most expensive. Well, the 5 stars are more expensive than the 6 stars, for an example. So when I go through the rest of this list and I say because they're a welfare, they're more expensive, that is what I'm referring to. So Wanqing, for an example, costs 10 DP instead of being 8 with Elysium. So because of that, he is going into B tier. He is still usable because he is a flag bearer, but he's definitely the worst one. When it comes to the Charger Vanguards, pretty much I only use them for killing very, very weak enemies at the beginning of the stage, which is usually slugs. So most of them are going to be in the D tier. So when it comes to Granny, she has higher defense, and she can actually tank a little bit. With her skill up, she can even get 300 defense. And 300 defense is kind of the stat line that you want for holding off enemies, because most weaker enemies have around that 300 attack. So she has potential, but unfortunately I have only used her in one clear that I've ever done. So she has all of this potential, but she's still very not really worth using. And her lower attack means that it's harder for her to kill slugs. So unfortunately she's going in D as well. When it comes to Fang Altar and Bagpipe, I am putting them both into C tier because they have, well, Fang Altar has basically Bagpipe skill 2, and she has high enough attack where if she's like off to the side or something, she can be worth putting, killing a few enemies to get DP that way. Same thing with Bagpipe. When it comes to Wildmane, I would consider her to be the best Charger Vanguard, but I'm still going to put her in C tier because even though that she gains that extra attack speed with her skill 1, I still find her hard to use because she pretty much only kills slugs just like the other Chargers, so I can't really justify putting her higher than that. To start off with the Tactician Vanguards, Beanstalk is going all the way into A tier. When I made the video in Near Light that Beanstalk changes everything, I wasn't being sarcastic, because at the time I had Cantabile and the Flag Bearers, and that was basically my only options, and Beanstalk being my first tactician, she opened up a lot of opportunities for having different strategies on how to stall those early enemies and generate TP. And her crab, for some reason, is the tankiest tactician summon, and she can also revive it with her skill completely. So she goes into A tier. With the exception of Milza's clone, obviously the Milza's clone can get higher defense. When it comes to Black Knight, I am putting her into B tier. She can get her skill off sooner than any other Tactician Vanguard, and generates a lot of DP. Unfortunately, she does have the weakest summon, in my opinion, out of the bunch. But if there's a stage where this summon doesn't matter anyway, like the Hear People Sows event, or any stage that has like ground tiles that the summon wouldn't survive anyway, she can be still good. Now the Tactician over on CN, I don't really know how how well he would work, but based on speculation, I'm putting him into B tier as well. Vigil. He is pretty much one of the worst 6 stars. Many people would probably call him the worst 6 star. But when it comes to Elite 0 Level 1, his summon is actually a lot better than you would expect. And also it can do things that no other Tactician Vanguard can do. So I am actually putting him into A tier as well. And that is because his summon, because it has multiple lives, let's say an enemy has a super high attack that the summon wouldn't survive anyway, and it can kind of act as a cheaper Mudrock in a sense, where it can come back really fast. And I think he has probably the best overall DP generation, other than maybe Black Knight, out of the Tacticians. So his wolves can do things that other Tacticians can't do, but because he costs 15 DP, I typically don't use him and think of other strategies instead. But he can still be very good. When it comes to Milzis, she's going straight into the S tier, because her clone, the melee version, is crazy. Although I have to make a confession that my CW9 clear that was titled Milzis is perfectly balanced in a sarcastic way, after more experience using her, the clone has a lot of weaknesses, and you have to find a way for the clone to steal enough stats in order for it to survive long enough to survive the normal enemies. But you've probably seen in a few of my clears that if I copy a defender, it can get 400 defense, which is massive. But at the same time, if it faces any elite enemy or any arts damage, it just evaporates. And she also has one of the weakest DP generations also. So, unironically, she's probably the best balanced, strong, is perfectly balanced as a very strong operator. Plenty of weaknesses, but under the right circumstances, she can be very powerful. Cantabile. I pretty much use her on most of the stages that I play, so she's going straight into the S tier because she gets the DP on hit, and sometimes that can be enough to get a defender down, and sometimes is even better at getting a defender down than the flag Vanguards. And the agents in general, in combination with the Tactician, that's what I was talking about with Beanstalk, they can be behind, Beanstalk Crab, for an example, and get their full skill off, or Cantabile's full skill off, and get that burst of DP early, and she's definitely extremely good. When it comes to Puzzle and Enos, they kind of do the same thing, being a weaker instructor guard, but they generate DP in exchange for that. So I am putting them both into the A tier. Puzzle focuses more on physical damage, and Enos has higher max HP, which is sometimes relevant, and also arts damage. The collab agent of Chilchuck, on the other hand, is a complete disgrace to the agent family, and that is because his skill is complete garbage, and it also has an animation, so unlike Puzzle and Enos, it takes him a few seconds in order to get his DP, he is RNG DP, and he doesn't get any attack modifiers, unlike the other agents. So I am putting him into the D tier. He is still usable, and I wouldn't use him any over other agents, but he is still usable in extreme circumstances. But realistically speaking, I probably wouldn't use him. All right, so that is the Vanguards taken care of. So let's look at the guards, and oh my, there are a lot of guards. Why are there so many guards? Okay, Bee Hunter. All she has going for her is her dodge, and I'm never going to rely on that. Because Project Red exists. She has, I think, 20% dodge, and Project Red, as a fast redeploy, also has dodge. So, unlike Flametail is dodge is guaranteed, and she generates DP, so that's why she gets out of the useless tier. Jackie as well doesn't have good enough stats in order to make her be usable. Same thing with... Oh, Dagda, I remember having a terrible skill 1 for Elite 0. Indra, I have into the D tier, and same thing with Flint. And that is because if you have them off to the side against really weak, really low defense enemies, they can at least do a little bit of damage. Same thing with Mountain and Changyu. One thing to note is that Mountain and Changyu are one of the best Milzis clones when it comes to dealing with early game enemies because of how fast their attack speed is. And Milzis' clone steals 250 attack and defense, so that can be very good. Mouse, I have in the... Whoa, what am I doing here? Wait, what happened to Mouse? Okay, I am putting Mouse into the B tier. She has decent arts damage, and her debuff is kind of nice, but there are definitely better arts cards. So she's okay. Astasia, I am putting in the A tier. She has a surprisingly really high amount of defense, and has the highest defense, actually, of all the arts guards. So that can be useful, but unfortunately, when I use an arts guard, they're usually not the one tanking, or if they are tanking, it's for a relatively short period of time. So being more defensive, like the 6-star ones are definitely a lot better. So Saidaroka, I have in the C tier. She has a really high amount of HP, and she heals back that HP, and that can be really useful. I use it on BI-7, I think it was, against like enemies that have high enough defense that arts damage would only... She can deal a little bit of arts damage while tanking like an enemy that either reduces defense or deals arts damage. But generally speaking, I haven't really been using her. There are definitely better options. So, Suitor. Does Suitor even need an introduction at this point? So, Suitor is going straight into the S tier. Her skill, even at Elite 0 level 1, is still very good. And Viviana is actually better than Suitor because her skill is automatic recovery, and also she has slightly higher defense, which is useful. So you can give yourself a cheer because Viviana finally beat Suitor in this niche. And when it comes to arts guards in general, Suitor and Viviana do so much more damage compared to any other arts guard. So they're definitely a league of their own. Centurions. Unfortunately, Popcar and Estelle don't have high enough stats to make them usable, so they're going straight into the useless tier. And Savage also. Savage I did originally have in D tier because she had slightly higher defense, but her attack is really low, actually. And 175 defense is realistically not high enough to justify using. And even off to the side, her damage isn't super high. So when it comes to Spectre, I have her in the D tier because just like with the brawlers that I have in here, if she's off to the side or something where she's not the one tanking, but she can deal damage, Her attack is surprisingly high. Broca, I am putting in the C tier because he can do the same thing but with arts damage, and so if the enemy has like 400 defense, then Spectre's not going to be doing much, whereas Broca still can do a bit of arts damage. Fuse, I have him in C tier as well. He can be put behind a defender, just like an instructor. So he has potential, but 400 attack is still not super high, and you also have to wait quite a while for his skill to charge. So he's kind of like a budget Blaze skill 2, but he's still not amazing. Blaze... Okay, Blaze I also have in C tier. Like I said, with Spectre, if she's off to the side, she can do some good damage. But unfortunately, 200 defense is not enough to tank multiple enemies. Like, the Arts Guards, they kind of work because they're one block and they only need to tank one enemy, if they are tanking at all. Whereas Blaze, unfortunately, can't really do that. However, her skill actually does a lot of damage. So, if she can be put off to the side, her damage is even better than Gaviel Alter. When it comes to Gaviel Alter, she's going straight into the S tier. I originally thought that Gaviel Alter was going to be one of the limited characters I was actually going to skip, because her banner was I think the first limited banner that I had after making this account. And I thought her defense and attack wasn't high enough to be all that good. However, I was proven wrong after I did 2-10 and a lot of Chapter 3, where her self-sustain, if she's against trash mobs that have low enough defense where she can heal herself very, very well, she is pretty much the only Centurion that can tank for herself, and she does a good amount of damage as well. So a very surprising good operator there. So easy S tier. Instructors. When it comes to Doberman, I'm putting her into the B tier as well. Her skill in combination with the instructor trait, she can do a lot of quite a bit of damage, actually. I think she can do like 650 attack or 600 attack with her skill 1, and she can be placed behind a defender, of course. So that is really good, surprisingly. Surprisingly really good is what I meant to say. Unfortunately, Swire and Wishlash are a lot worse. They do get their talent, and they do get their skill 1 that boosts their talent, but their talent is garbage at this level, so unfortunately I'm going to put them into the D tier. Doc. Oh boy. When I saw Doc being introduced on CN, named Doc and being an instructor guard, I thought, oh, this is going to be awesome. An instructor guard that can heal a defender as an emergency heal, or have maybe a skill that deals damage but also heals other allies as well. But unfortunately, he's garbage, and I'm putting him straight into the useless tier. And that is because he can only heal himself, and he doesn't have high enough stats to justify using. And unfortunately, even if his skill 1 could heal other operators, he heals for less than 300 with level 1 skills, and it has like a 35 SP cost. So even if he could heal other operators, he's unfortunately trash either way. Definitely one of the bigger disappointments of late. Bryophyta, I'm putting him into the A tier. He's basically Doberman with 10% higher attack and defense, and he can add defense to a defender, which lessens the healing pressure by a little bit. So he is really good. And Palace, I am also putting into A tier. Palace does better against low defense enemies, and Bryophyta does better against higher defense enemies because he has Power Strike, which is 170% of attack in combination with the Instructor trait of 120% attack when not blocking enemies. He can do like 700 attack, which is pretty high. And then Palace does like 400, but it's a double hit. However, I have to call out the Arknights wiki that they said that Palace gets only 30 attack from her trust, which is clearly wrong. So they must have had E0 Lvl in charge of that, spreading misinformation again. So I was actually going to put her into B tier, and then I found out that she gets 50 attack instead of 30 from trust, and so she belongs into the A tier. As for the range guards, Midnight I am putting into D. His arts damage is the only reason why I would ever use him over instructors. Frostleaf, her defense from her trust is actually irrelevant for level 1. I mean, 209 defense is not awful, but her slow is the only reason why I would use her, so she just barely gets into the D tier. Areen, his prioritization of drones is the only reason why I would use him. But they're still not great. As for the cat, I'm putting him into the useless tier, which is really unfortunate in many ways because his skill 1 is, on paper, a really interesting idea where he's a range guard and then he can switch to being an AoE guard, which sounds really good, but he just doesn't have the stats to be able to tank for himself or do that great of damage regardless, so I don't see myself using him. Leto, unfortunately, also doesn't have high enough stats for me to realistically use. Lapland, on the other hand, I'm putting her into C because her skill 1 is unlimited duration, and she can actually get like an alright amount of attack. Irescape, I'm also putting into the C tier. He does a bit of arts damage and hits multiple targets, so has a little bit of potential there. Silver Ash and Thorns, both of them I am also putting into the C tier. They have an okay amount of attack, but really what sets them apart from the other Lord Guards is that they have 250-ish defense. So in theory, I could use them instead of a defender, but unfortunately, from my experience, just that little bit of 50 defense difference can mean a lot, especially when it comes to the healing pressure and the early start of a stage. So in practice, well, they have in theory they have potential, but in practice I would rather use a Sentinel Defender anyway. And also keep in mind that they have the reduced attack when they do their range attacks. Chubai, I'm putting into B tier because unlike the other two 6-star Lord Guards, she does AoE arts damage, so potentially she can be used instead of an instructor, but I would say instructors are generally better. Alright, the Dreadnought Guards. Melantha, Kyostin V's favorite guard, or used to be. Where did I put her? There's so many guards that I have to look through my entire list here. Yeah, okay. I put her into C tier. She is actually pretty cheap for a Dreadnought guard, and she has an alright amount of stats. But she's still not really amazing either. Matamaro, I'm putting her into D tier. She's kind of like a physical damage version of Seidoroka, and arts damage, like under those circumstances, I would prefer that. And also Sidoroka has a better heal on her S1, but yeah, I don't really see myself using her. Conviction I'm also putting into C tier. She has a really good skill 1 and that meme potential of that crit, but unfortunately she doesn't have super high stats at this level. Franka, I'm also putting into C tier. Mostly these dreadnoughts I use as like heli drops. So their attack, their skill isn't really relevant because I don't keep them on the field long enough for them to activate their skill. So having around 500 attack with Franka is alright, but still not amazing. Unfortunately, Morgan has a garbage skill 1, so she's going straight into the useless tier. As for Flamebringer, he's also going into C. He has a lower attack compared to other dreadnoughts, but he also has like a power strike skill, which is pretty good in comparison, but still not amazing. The collab Laios, he's basically the best heli drop dreadnought because his skill is a passive. And it gives him an extra, I think, 25% attack. So he is actually really good as long as there isn't a leader on the field to negate his skill. Unfortunately, for him, Crushers exist, which are just better heli drops in general. So I don't know how much I would actually use him. As for Scotty, she's also going into the C tier. Well, she is better than a lot of these other dreadnoughts. She's still not amazing. Neural Alter, I'm putting it into the A tier because she's basically an instructor with super high attack. She can do 700 attack every attack instead of every 4th or 5th hit. But unfortunately, because it takes so long for her skill to activate, I can't put her into S tier. There are so many situations where it's like, oh, she would be so nice to use, but it takes like 70 seconds for her skill to charge. And that is very painful. As for Lessing, if Laios didn't exist, Lessing would probably be the best heli drop dreadnought. He's okay. He can do 1,000 damage with his power strike, which is, or 1,000 attack with his power strike, which is really good. Unfortunately, just like with Laios, Crushers exist, so I can't put him higher than B tier. As for Castle 3, I'm putting him into A tier. He adds 10% attack and defense, which can be nice, and if there's a free slot, he can be really good. Unfortunately, when it comes to Elite 0 Level 1, I don't often have just separate slots free to use him, so I don't use him all that often. But if I do, he is pretty good in those situations. Alright, Crushers. Silvergun has been waiting for this. Quartz. She's going all the way into A tier. She's amazing. She revolutionized how I could do stages when I got to Chapter 4 and into Chapter 5. Because of the Crusher's super high HP pool, especially against casters, it doesn't matter if it's arts damage, and often the casters actually attack slower than physical damage enemies. So Crushers can do not only do a lot of damage, they can hit 2 targets, and their super high HP pool lets them survive long enough to either let my other operators kill whatever they're stalling, or to soak up some damage, because the ways to mitigate damage at this level is very limited. So, very, very good operator. Wind Chimes is Quartz, but just a little bit better. She's also going to A tier. She's not better enough to go into S tier in my opinion, but they're both very good. When it comes to Hodair, he's straight up broken. He can do 1300 attack with his skill, and he can heal himself. And he has 3000 HP and 822 attack for some reason. So, yeah. When it comes to Ulpian, he's even more broken, shockingly enough. Ulpian, okay, so imagine Gladia, except multi-target, and does 1400 attack with his skill 1 at E0 level 1. That's Ulpian. So, whoever was in charge of making Ulpian skill 1, I have no idea what they were thinking when they were making those numbers. So he is the best puller for E0 level 1. Okay, when it comes to Mushas, or I guess they're called Solo Blades now for some reason. Utage, I use her on 2-10, but unfortunately her low stats past Chapter 2 just don't really allow her to do very well. So unfortunately I have to put her into the useless tier. And Mushas don't, or Solo Blades don't do very well because they are really expensive for some reason. And they just don't really have that great of stats at level 1. Akafuyu is probably the best one, and I'm putting her into C tier. And her skill is very well designed for a Solo Blade, where if she takes enough damage, where she's threatened, she can just activate her skill, stop blocking, and then she does the double strike, have decent amount of attack. So, just out of all of them, she is just the best one. Norcorn Alter, I am also putting into C tier because his tenacity gives him defense, which allows him to potentially tank stuff. But both of these, they're still not amazing. Helliger, I'm putting into the D tier. His defense is laughably bad at like 160 or something like that, so he can't survive like any physical damage, really, unless it's really weak enemies. And Zuela is better than Helliger, and I'm still putting him into D tier. I thought that Zuela's skill would make him at least decent, but his lack of defense made it so that he took so much damage that he's just not good. Alright, onto a more positive branch, the Reapers. Hummus I'm going to put into the B tier. He's decent, actually. It's just that the La Pluma is quite a bit better with because of her higher stats. But Hummus is actually not bad. Speaking of La Pluma, I'm putting her into the A tier. She has decent amount of attack, and she has good amount of attack speed, and does true AoE. And because she only has one block, she doesn't really need to. She doesn't take a lot of damage either. So, especially like if she's off to the side, and also the Reaper range allows them to be used in interesting ways behind defenders or to the side of defenders. So overall, Reapers are really good. Highmore, unfortunately, is just a worse La Pluma. And I'm actually kind of annoyed at this, that the main reason to use Highmore is for her elemental damage recovery, or at least when you promote her. And sadly, she does not get her elemental damage recovery talent at Elite 0. And La Pluma gets her attack speed talent at Elite 0. Why? I don't get it. Why? Okay, moving on. Executor Alter I'm putting into the S tier because he actually has really high defense for a Reaper, I think around 250. And also he ignores defense and he gets a range extension, so overall really good. Although La Pluma might actually be better against like extremely low defense enemies because her skill does a double strike, but generally speaking, Executor Alter has no problem, or shouldn't have any problem, tanking those basic weak enemies because he has that higher defense. So, I'm putting him in the S tier. Cutter. Where did I put Cutter? Okay, I put Cutter in the C tier. If she's off to the side, just like with the Centurions and the Brawlers, she actually has a pretty good skill, even at Elite 0 level 1, so I'm putting her into the C tier. Babik? Where did I put Babik? Okay, I put her into the C tier as well. She can do a little bit of arts damage, so she does alright. But she can't tank anything. When it comes to Tachenka, I have a really hard time saying his name. He is the best, probably the best dual strike guard, because he can be placed behind a defender, so he doesn't need to tank anything, and dual strike guards actually do pretty good damage against very low defense. So, he's pretty good. Or should be pretty good. Irene, the only reason why I would use Irene, realistically, is for her levitate. And so, I thought where did I put her? Okay, I put Irene in the C tier as well. The levitate can interrupt attacks and whatnot, and also she can allow trap masters to place traps underneath enemies she levitates. So I think that is why I put her in C tier. But realistically speaking, if I'm not using Dorothy, she probably goes into the D for sure, if not even the useless. Her skill is much worse compared to the other dual strikes. Dagenbrecher, on the other hand, has an even worse skill and doesn't have that synergy, so I am putting her in the D tier. She can do some AoE, but her attack isn't super high, her defense isn't high enough to really tank much, and so she doesn't get very high. Which is kind of refreshing to see, like, meta operators being low on this list sometimes. Alright, for Chen, I put her into C because she can do the stun. Can help a little bit, but realistically speaking, I think the other ones, like, do a lot more damage overall. Well, maybe not a lot more, but Chen's stun can be useful under certain circumstances. As for the Liberators, Tequila is really good. I'm putting him straight into the A tier. He can do 700 attack with every attack if he's fully charged with his skill. And also he gets attack speed. So that is quite a lot for a non-crusher to deal. I mean, doing the same damage as Neural Alter is very impressive. But unfortunately, that 40-second wait time can make him really hard to use, so I haven't really used him recently. So that is a pretty big downside, but he is really good on those situations where he is useful. And he can tank quite a lot. He is very tanky, with like 2,000 HP, 200-ish defense, and even some res, so has high potential but is hard to use. Mjolnir, on the other hand, is just a worse Tequila. He does get defense, which might be relevant in a very niche case, but overall Tequila is just going to be better. Okay, Oda, or Ada, not sure how they say his name, the Earthshaker, I'm putting him into B, or not Pepe, grab wrong one. I'm putting him into B as well. He has super high attack, he does a bit of AoE damage. So if he's off to the side, he actually does better than some of these other options that need to be off to the side in order to be useful. But because of his attack and because it does AoE, he has an advantage over them. When it comes to Pepe, on the other hand, she's going straight into the A tier. Okay, so I have to say, what is it with guards having over 1,000 attack when they use their skills with low cooldowns at E0 level 1? Pepe does almost 1,100 every 8 seconds and does AoE and has like 230 defense, so she can potentially lane hold. So, yeah. Very, very powerful operator, potentially. Crushers kind of make sense, but man, I just don't know sometimes. When it comes to defenders, I need to place down pretty much as soon as possible to block the early game enemies, or early stage enemies. And like I said before when telling you about guards, 300 defense is kind of like the minimum that a lane holder needs to be effective. And one thing I forgot to talk about for Doberman, Palace, and Bryophyta, when it comes to instructors, they have over 200 defense, which is good enough for an operator who isn't the one actively blocking things. So if like a dog gets through or something like that, they don't instantly melt. So that definitely works in their favor. But when it comes to defenders, unfortunately for Norcorn, Norcorn is like the best bro, right? And I love his character, but unfortunately he only has like 260 defense, and that puts him into the useless tier. I'm sorry. Beagle is surprisingly usable because she has 300 defense, but her skill isn't very good, and for one more DP, you get much better defenders when it comes to Quora and Bubble. So C tier, she's can be usable, but not great. Cardigan. Unfortunately, I have to put into the useless tier as well. She gets 229 defense, and she does get higher HP that makes her, like, potentially tank arts damage better, especially with her heal, but she doesn't heal enough, and there are just better options. So I just don't ever see myself using Cardigan. And Matterhorn is like, when it comes to tanking arts damage, what did I do? Okay. He's in the D tier. He's like the bare minimum. He has much higher max HP. I think he even has a little bit of res. But he's still pretty bad with like 240 defense. When it comes to Quora and Bubble, I'm putting them both into the B tier. They're kind of the standard defenders of like what you would want. With over 300 defense, they get plus 20% with their skill, so they're both pretty good. Heavy Rain I am also putting into B tier. She has a little bit lower defense, but she heals herself, that kind of makes up for it. And she has really high HP, so she does pretty well against arts damage in comparison to Matterhorn and Cardigan, and she doesn't really suffer against physical damage. When it comes to Bison, I am putting him all the way into the A tier. He used to be the tankiest defender when it comes to straight up survivability against physical damage, because his skill lasts for 40 seconds, and I think he gets like plus 30% defense. So he does really well. Unfortunately, his attack is garbage. Just like a lot of most of these protector defenders. So, but there are situations where he actually does better than Hashiguma because his of how long his skill lasts. So, like, in a straight-up survivability point situation, he is still very good. Croissant. I put her into B tier. She's actually has a really good skill, but it auto-activates. So there are situations where that is not ideal. Hashiguma, I'm going to put her into A tier. The reason to use Hashiguma over the other defenders is because she has a lot higher attack, being at 280 instead of around 200. And that is massive. Like, if there's weak enemies that begin at a stage and they have 100 defense, Hashiguma can do a lot more damage to that. And usually, like, that little bit of damage contribution can mean a lot. But her skill only lasts for 20 seconds. It has a 50-second SP cost. So her skill is definitely not very good. When it comes to Nien, she's going straight into the S tier. Because she can do arts damage. And her skill, I mean, she basically has Hashiguma's skill, except it charges in 30 seconds instead of 50. And can do arts damage. So she can always contribute to the damage, no matter what the enemy is. She can at least do a little bit of damage. And she has really high max HP. Friston, I am going to put him into A tier. He is really good in those situations where you need a blocker and you don't have the DP for a blocker. Unfortunately, I'm not putting him into S tier because he only has around 260 defense. So as soon as his talent runs out, he does suffer quite a bit. Liskarm, putting her into the B tier. She does quite a bit of damage, but her skill auto-activates, and it only lasts for like 8 seconds, so it's not very good. Blitz, on the other hand, I'm putting him into the A tier because his skill stuns and silences enemies. So that is very good against low-altitude, hovering enemies. And especially for like So Long Adele and stuff, he is amazing. And unfortunately, I won't get him until the Ash Banner rerun, so I won't get to experience that quite yet. But he is really good. So putting him into the A tier. Underflow, I'm putting into A tier as well. She's basically a 5-star version of Jessica the Liberated. And also, like, just Liskarm, except with a much better skill. When it comes to Jessica Alter, easy S tier. When Hypergriff were designing Jessica the Liberated, they thought of, we need to give her that shield at Elite 0 because that her main selling point is to switch facing directions. But Hypergriff made her shield have higher stats than Hashiguma for some reason. And her skill is unlimited duration, and she has really high attack for a defender. So with her skill up, she has 400 defense and 400 attack, which is really good. And then the shield has all kinds of utility. It can be used for blocking 2 extra enemies. It can be tanking an elite enemy that would be very dangerous otherwise, to stall something, to bait, you name it. To think that this is a defender is crazy to me. Just broken all the way around. And her 100 SP charge time for her skill, it doesn't even matter, because if there's enemies that are dangerous to her before her skill activates, plop down her shield, she's ready to go. Spot. I'm putting Spot into the C tier. He's the only medic defender that can heal on a duration skill. So that means that if he's off to the side or he's behind a defender, he has a duration skill to focus on healing the blocker as much as possible. So he heals more in a burst compared to other medic defenders. Gummy, on the other hand, oh, Gummy. Straight up D tier. Gummy has garbage defense, and while she has high HP, she can't really tank much. And her skill, even though that it doesn't have the 50% HP threshold, she heals significantly less compared to other medic defenders. So, realistically speaking, she can't tank, and she heals a lot less, and if I'm using a medic defender to heal, they're either going to need to be tanky, or they're going to need to heal the blocker as much as possible. So, she has to be... So, D tier is all I can do for her. And if Supa watches this, Swire Alter as a fast redeploy has higher defense and heals more than Gummy. So, feel free to bring that up to Hypergriff. Baseline, on the other hand, he's going into C tier. He doesn't have high enough defense to really tank, but he does have similar attack to the other 6-star medic defender, so he can at least heal a decent amount, but without being able to tank, I can't put him higher than that. When it comes to Neural, I'm putting her into B because she has high enough defense to actually tank stuff with around 290. So that is high enough to at least block things if I need her to. Hung, I'm also putting into B because he has 300 defense, and his defense recovery skill has potential to heal a decent amount, like if he's the one blocking, but realistically speaking, I would probably rather use Neural for the consistency. Shenshi from the collab, he's basically Gummy, but actually good. So, putting him into B tier. He also does the buff, which might be useful, but primarily he heals so much more than Gummy that that he is able to go up much higher on the list. When it comes to the 6-star medic defenders, I'm putting them into the A tier. All 3 of them. Blemenshine has less than 300 defense, but she also has high enough healing to compensate for that, and also she has pretty good damage for a defender, especially a medic defender. So she can be used in place of Saria or Shu. When it comes to Shu, she's basically Saria with 1 to 2% higher stats for some reason. Alright. The duelist defenders, I put Cement into C. Or, not C, B tier. Her skill does true AoE, which is kind of nice, and she has she has the 300 defense necessary. So she can be, like, in front of a protector defender, and then hit, like, all 4 enemies that are being blocked. And I did do that on my HS EX1 clear. So, just as an example. When it comes to Aurora, I'm also putting her into B tier, but unfortunately Aurora is really hard to use because she has this potential of... Her skill allows her to have like 550 defense, which is the highest out of any defender that I have. But unfortunately, at Elite 0, because she needs to block things in order to charge her skill, it makes her really hard to use, and then on top of that, she stuns herself after the skill is over. So, because she has the potential to be really good, I'm putting her into B tier, but realistically, I don't really see myself realistically using her for anything. When it comes to Eunectus, on the other hand, I'm putting Eunectus straight into the S tier, because she's basically, or not A tier, S tier, there we go. She's your definition of a thick stat stick. And if you need to 1v1 a strong enemy. She has nearly 600 attack, which is crazy for a defender. And because of how her skill 1 works, she also has like 340 defense, which is pretty good, and super high HP, so I'm putting her into S tier. Arts defenders, on the other hand, both Durnar and Cherney is going into the D tier. You would think that them being basically higher defense arts guards, that they would be more useful, but because they block 3 instead of 1, it actually makes them worse. So, they're not very good. When it comes to Shalem, on the other hand, he's going to the C tier because he is by far the best DPS out of these arts guards, and he hits all his blocked enemies, which is really nice. But again, because of his low defense, it makes him really hard to use, so very situational. When it comes to Asbestos, she's the only one out of the arts guards who gets extra defense from her trust. So she's a little bit more usable, but she still doesn't have 300. Like, if she had 300, she would probably be, like, in the A tier or something. But even 260 kind of holds her back. Lutenata, unfortunately, Lutenata is going straight into the useless tier. She's basically... she's a super high DP cost defender that doesn't compensate with anything. Having Power Strike on a defender is very interesting and would be useful, but unfortunately her defense is garbage, and I don't think she even gets her talent at Elite 0, so she can't even heal herself. Vulcan has terrible stats and is kind of in the same situation as Lutenata, being not able to compensate for her lack of stats. Mudrock, on the other hand, Mudrock is going to S tier because she can block entire instances of damage. So it doesn't matter if the enemy has 1,000 attack, 2,000 attack, doesn't matter. As long as she has a shield, she can tank that. And because of that, she is one of the tankiest defenders like that I can use as like a heli drop or something. Or situations where you have enemies that do double damage on their first hit or something. Mudrock is perfect for that. So, and because she has that self-sustain of healing herself with those shields, she can be really, well, she's amazing, simply put. Penance, on the other hand, Penance can't heal herself or get more barrier, but I'm still putting her in the B tier. I thought she was going to be like D at the best, but after my experience, she has really proven herself. Her skill 1 is amazing with doing arts damage, and also if you let her charge it all the way, doing that extra long duration stun. She's almost like a heli drop Mudrock, but is focused on DPS, but she can't tank as much. But because of her sheer HP pool, she basically kind of works like a crusher that has defense, if I have the DP for it. And because of that, she definitely a very surprising operator. But because she doesn't get more barrier and she doesn't even have 300 defense, I can't put her higher than the B tier. But she has her moments for sure. Ashlock, I'm putting into B as a fortress defender. She has decent attack, and with her skill, she can get around 600, but I do consider her to be the weakest out of the 3 fortress defenders. Speaking of Fire Whistle, I put Fire Whistle into the A tier because she does a little bit of arts damage, and she has a little bit higher defense also, compared to Horn, at least. I think Ashlock also gets extra defense, but I think Fire Whistle has the highest, so that can also be useful. Horn, as you would expect, she's going straight into the S tier. The amount of damage that she can do with having the unique range that she does, She can be put in the back, does large AoE, her skill charges very quickly. She's basically a ground tile AoE sniper with a better skill, in all honesty. So she just does amazing work. Alright, we're off to the snipers. When it comes to marksman snipers, your traditional snipers that focus on aerial units, at Elite 0 Level 1, their stats are awful. So, unfortunately, most of these marksman snipers are going straight into the useless tier. And, whoops, all the way to Jessica. And that, I had a situation when I first got into Chapter 4, I think it was 4-1, had a lot of unmanned drones, or non-attacking drones that would try to slip by your defenses and whatnot. And I tried using Jessica, I think at the time, to focus on those drones, because it was like marksman sniper, they don't have high defense. And I kid you not, Ashtini, as like an AoE focused caster, did the job when Jessica could not. Even though Jessica focused on those drones, because Ashtini slowed them down and whatnot, she was able to clear 4-1 and Jessica couldn't. That is how bad most of these marksman snipers are. So pretty much all of them are not going to be very high on this list. Mei is going into the D tier because she can at least slow things with her skill. Meteor has the defense debuff. And when it comes to DPS operators, Blue Poison and April are kind of the bottom line that I would even consider using against aerial enemies, and Greythroat also goes in there. So pretty much the enemy has to have like 50 defense or less, or else they don't really do much. Insider is also D tier. He's basically April skill, but with ammo. And April's, like I said, kind of like the bottom line. And having that 170% attack with Power Strike is actually really good for these snipers, but unfortunately they don't have enough base attack in order to make them work. Platinum also goes into the D tier. She gets that attack up, which can be useful, but again, just not high enough stats. Cruise Alter, on the other hand, does double hit, and also gives herself camouflage, so I'm actually putting her into the C tier. Exia, where did I put Exia? Exia is going into the C tier as well. I think her skill has like 5 SP cost or 4 SP cost, and she does a triple hit, so she is the more single target option out of the 6-star, out of the 2 6-star marksmen, not including Ash. And like I said, because of how low their attack is, even 50 or 100 defense drastically lowers their DPS. And Archetto is also going into the C tier. I would consider Archetto to be better than Exia because she has higher attack scaling and she hits multiple enemies. But both of them, like, the enemy basically has to have 0 defense in order to be good. Ash, on the other hand, has an unlimited duration skill and has double hit for every hit. So I'm actually putting her into B tier. She's, in my opinion, by far the best one out of these. When it comes to Justice Knight, let me look at my list here. Justice Knight goes into the C tier. She can activate devices and stuff that needs hits, or if there's an enemy that needs a certain amount of hits in order to be killed, Justice Knight can be useful for that. But other than that, still not great. Acid Drop. Acid Drop is going into the D tier. She does have higher attack, but out of the heavy shooters, she's definitely not great. And is the weakest one because of her low stats. So because of that, Providence is going to the C tier. And where did I put Melanite? Melanite is going to the B tier. Because she has plus 120% attack with her skill 1. So she gets 900 attack with every hit. So she's basically a hunter sniper in the heavy shooter branch. And that is really good. Unfortunately, her skill has terrible uptime, so I can't put her higher than that. When it comes to Schwartz and Pazzi, they're both going into the B tier as well. They can do decent damage with their skills, for sure. But they have short range, and primarily because spread shooters and also... Well, spread shooters, besiegers, and hunters are kind of all better than them when it comes to their damage. So even though they have good skills, that definitely holds them back. Totter. Where did I put Totter? Totter is going to the C tier. So you might be thinking, oh, Totter is really good against invisible enemies. And you would be right when it comes to when he's promoted. But when it comes to Elite 0 Level 1, invisible enemies, the only reason why I would use Totter is if I can kill the invisible enemies or significantly damage them by the time they reach my defenders, or if they're a very dangerous enemy in those situations. So invisible enemies, I pretty much always block them anyway, because realistically speaking, the only time when killing an invisible enemy is useful is if they're either dangerous enough to be a threat to the defender, or there is some other advantage. And I can also just use fast redeploys to make them uninvisible. So Totter's usage just isn't... He fills a niche that I don't really need. Let's just put it that way. Toddfidence... Where did I put Toddfidence? Okay, Toddfidence is going into the B tier. She can do some defense reduction that can be a little bit useful. So she's okay. Yurato, I'm putting into the A tier, because if you have Kafka and Yurato, and you have either an elite enemy or a boss that is vulnerable to sleep, you can pretty much permanently sleep that enemy. So because of that, you can permanently stall enemies, and I actually did that on Pompeii. Even though it took forever to kill Pompeii, that was how I cleared OF8, was using Yurato and Kafka. And because of that crowd control and potential, I am putting her fairly high. So when it comes to Rosa and Typhon, they're basically at the same level. Like, they have slightly different skills, but they're both very effective at... Similarly effective, both being in the A tier. AoE snipers. Where did I put Catapult? Oh, Catapult, because of her low attack, I put her into the useless tier. Shirayuki, I'm putting it into D. Her range extension is more useful at Elite 0 Level 1, but her attack just isn't very good. Seiza, on the other hand, or Seiza, is going into the C tier. He's decent. Not super amazing, but early on, especially before I got better options, he still was able to do the job decently well, but not amazing either. Meteorite also into the C tier. As for the B tier, I'm putting, or Jeyun, I'm putting into B tier. She, for some reason, has the best skill 1 out of the non-6-star AoE snipers, so we're getting attack speed and extra attack. So she's basically a better Seiza or Seiza while also being free, which is kind of funny. And Meteorite does get some extra AoE, so like as a heli drop, she would be the best one, like I used on 4-7. But Jaeyun is the best one out of those. When it comes to Fiametta, I'm also putting into B tier. Fiametta is kind of disappointing in some ways because her HP drain with her talent, she actually gets her talent at Elite 0, is so high. She basically needs like a dedicated medic or like an AoE medic in order to sustain her HP, because for her to be useful over other AoE snipers, she needs to have the max vigor of like above 80%, I think it is. So she kind of needs like either changing a single target medic to an AoE medic or having like a multi-target medic like Ea Alter to keep her HP high enough to justify using her. And I just find that too much of a hassle under most circumstances. But her normal attack, if she has that high vigor, is pretty good, though. Even though she can't really activate her skill realistically, because it has like a 30 SP cost. Offensive recovery on an AoE sniper. Like, what? What is with that? Okay, Sniper W. I am putting into the S tier because she is one of the few operators, especially ranged operators, that can stun. I think Blitz and W are the only ones that I can think of off the top of my head that can stun. So low altitude hovering enemies, W is one of the only ones that can do that. And she also gets really high scaling with her skill, so she can do 1000 attack bomb every 25 seconds. Which is pretty good. If low altitude hovering enemies didn't exist, however, I would put her into the A tier. She's only S tier because she can knock down those hovering enemies, unlike other. Like, she's one of my only options for that. The Terra Research Commission I'm putting into the B tier because they do AoE. They have high enough attack to deal decent damage against weak enemies or really low defense enemies, and they're really good against like hit count enemies. And that is pretty much what flingers are used for primarily, is if enemies have 0 defense or 50 defense or whatever, and the aftershocks are allowed to deal some damage, they have higher DPS than AoE snipers. And they're also surprisingly tanky. So when it comes to Grey Alter, he's also going into the B tier. Actually, all of the flingers are going into the B tier. So Grey Alter, he gets attack speed. Rosemontis can do arts damage with her skill, and W Alter does the additional aftershocks and is kind of like the more physical damage focused version of Rosemontis. Even though I despise Wizardel's existence for many different reasons, she is surprisingly well balanced for Elite 0 level 1. So when it comes to spread shooters, I'm putting Pinecone, Austa, and Executor all into the A tier. So just like with the Flingers, all 3 of these are all viable, pretty much. Or they have distinct advantages over the other. Pinecone has that fast charging skill and burst for like consistent damage. Austa has that long duration skill and attack speed, and Executor has that extra damage bonus against further enemies, further ranged enemies on that extra further tile. And Chen Alter just straight up is by far the best one, so she's going straight up into the S tier. Because she's basically like Pinecone except with higher attack. We having like really good, consistent DPS. So when it comes to the Deadeyes, the Deadeye ones are kind of worse besiegers under most circumstances because they have shorter effective range and their attack is lower. So when it comes to Ambrielle, I'm putting her into the D tier because she does get that range extension, but she doesn't get extra attack. So 500 attack is not great when it comes to that. And then Lunacub and Andriana, I'm putting into the C tier. They do get attack up skills, but they get HP with their trust primarily, and a lower attack bonus. So because of that, they're not super strong. Firewatch, on the other hand, not only does she get higher attack with her trust, but also gains camouflage. So that is very useful, and I put her into the B tier because of that. And Fartooth has the highest attack and gets attack speed, so I'm also putting her into the B tier. For Caper, Caper's going into the D tier. She's a little bit better than the marksman snipers in general, but she's still not great. Having only 270 attack is just not very good. And when it comes to the 6-star version of Caper, where did I put her? I put her into the B tier. It sounds like her skill 1 is a stance change. So it has potential to be extremely good, especially against the trash mob. So with because I am not on CN at all, I can't test it or anything until she comes out on global, but there's potential of her being extremely good against low defense enemies, and I might put her into the A tier. But as of right now, I'm putting her into B. Hunters, on the other hand, Hunters are very good because they're super high damage per hit. So they're kind of just better heavy shooters in general. So Cold Shot, I'm actually putting into the A tier. And Ray is straight up broken. Ray, how can I put this? You know when I said that Crushers were broken because they can do like 1300 or 1400 attack at level 1? Ray can do 1700. So that means if I was using level 4 skills instead of level 1 skills, she can deal damage to Patriot phase 1 at level 1. I think I did the math that it was like 2200 or 2300 with level 4 skills and potentials. And she can push further than any pusher at this level with level 1 skills. I just don't know what else to say. She is, and it's only on a 16-second cooldown as well for that skill, so she effectively has 5 ammo instead of 4. And Cold Shot only does 900 with her skill. So, yeah, Ray is just ridiculous. Alright, getting into the casters. Wow, this is... When it comes to... Sorry, I'm just needing to rearrange my papers here. I printed out the whole list, so I didn't need to memorize it. So Durin is, unfortunately... Durin and Stewart, unfortunately, and Hayes, in addition, don't have high enough stats to be useful. When it comes to core casters, mech casters are straight up better. So, Quantipilot, the only reason why I would use him is because he targets air with his skill. other than that, he's not very good. As for Amiya, I'm putting her into the C tier because she has surprisingly very high HP for a caster, with around 900. So if there's a stage where there's an enemy where she needs to tank a hit, or there's AoE, especially unavoidable AoE like on DV8, just as an example, she can tank things that other casters can't, while also having like decent damage. And speaking of Tomimi, I am putting her into the D tier. She actually has higher HP than Amiya, but her skill doesn't improve her arts damage. So Tomimi is similar to the cat, the range guard cat, where she has a very interesting idea of she can do arts damage, and then let's just say if a caster comes along and you pop her skill, and then she does physical damage because then to avoid the caster's high res or something like that. That is a very interesting idea. Unfortunately, at this level, she doesn't have the stats to realistically make her that appealing when it comes to that. So D tier, like, she has potential, but realistically speaking, I don't think she's very good either. Nightmare, on the other hand, is a very unique core caster, and because she heals. And I am putting her into the A tier because she's basically an incantation medic. So, like Hibiscus Altar, except one thing that makes her very interesting in comparison to them is that her healing is not affected by the res of what she's attacking. So, with her skill up, she heals for 140 HP per attack, so her healing is actually pretty good, all things considered. And also, she has alright damage. But because her healing, her skill lasts so long, and also her healing is not affected by res, she can be very good in very specific situations. So it's not a niche that I use very often, but when it comes up, she is amazing. Absinthe, I decided to put into the B tier, and that is because she has an unlimited duration skill with plus 30% attack, and she prioritizes the lowest HP enemy, which is sometimes very useful. And there are times where if there's a constant stream of enemies, she actually out damages Holo Hayek in terms of DPS, which surprised me. So in my IS-7 clear, I use Absinthe instead of Holo because Absinthe somehow did more damage than Holo Hayek. As for AFL, I'm putting her into C tier. When you activate both her skill twice, she gains both attack and attack speed, but Mecha Core casters are just better in general. When it comes to Kyobi, she is one of the few operators that binds, except it is a single target bind. So I'm putting her into B tier because in CC12, that is how both Elite Zero Max and Elite Zero Level 1 actually was able to beat the Avenger boss at high risk because of Kyobi's bind. So it's very situational, and her skill does do decent damage, but it's kind of one of those niches that is very rare, but is a powerful niche. So I'm putting her there, because crowd control options at Elite Zero are very limited. Speaking of Holo Hayek, I'm putting her into the A tier as well. She is one of the few core casters that I consider using over mech casters. And if that happens, they're going to be high on this list. So Holo Hayek, the reason why I use her is because her skill targets 2 enemies, and if she only targets 1, she levitates it, which can be useful for either stalling or interrupting an attack and stuff like that. So she is very good. But most of the time, like Golden Glow and the other mech casters have a similar amount of damage, but because how Holohaic skill works, she ranks very high on this list. When it comes to Logos, he is also in the Cherney. Where did Logos go? There we go. Logos is going into B tier. I'm pretty sure I had Cherney in the D tier. Logos, I'm putting him into the B tier because he has a range extension with a skill 1, so he's kind of like Absinthe that trades a little bit of damage for that extra range, and sometimes that range has potential uses. Unfortunately, though, the range extension is the only reason why I would use him, and it takes like 90 seconds for a skill 1 to charge, so he's still not amazing. And when it comes to his like execution thing, when enemies are low HP, he has such low attack that that's basically irrelevant at this level. Speaking of the mech casters, I put Click in the B tier, and also Minimalist in the B tier. They're both really good. And Rock goes all the way to A tier. So the kind of the hierarchy when it comes to mechacore casters is that Click and Minimalist, depending on the situation, they kind of are very similar. Like, Minimalist has a longer duration skill, but Click has the higher base attack for off skill. And then Rock is better than them, and then Golden Glow is on top. But when it comes to Kajira, she's going into the C tier. So it really tells you how powerful the mecha casters are compared to core casters when the weakest one is on the same level as Aya is. For Golden Glow, I mean, easy S tier. She is the single highest arts damage, single target DPS that Elite Zero has. By a lot. Like, the amount of damage this pink cat can do is crazy to me. And on top of that, because of how her skill works, she can lock on her drones, and because she doesn't have her talent yet, those drones will attach to that enemy if they get out of her range until the skill ends, and that can be very powerful as well. When it comes to the AoE casters, 12F goes into the D tier because he has a stupidly high amount of HP for some reason. I kid you not. 12F, a 2-star AoE caster, has higher defense than Jessica the Liberated. I am not joking about that. Why he has so much HP, I have no idea, but his actual damage isn't very good, and tanking is pretty much the only reason why I would use him over someone else. And pretty much specifically arts damage, because his defense is really low. So D tier is is all I can do for him. When it comes to Lava, she doesn't have high enough stats to justify using her, and Gray is literally a worse 12F. Gitano also doesn't have high enough stats, and then Skyfire I put into C tier. Same thing with Leonhardt. They pretty much are identical to each other. And then Santala, where did I put her? I put her into the B tier. She has attack speed with her skill, so out of the non-6-star AoE casters, she's has the best skill in my opinion, so she's going into the B tier. When it comes to Mastima, she has the generic plus attack skill 1, unfortunately. So where did I put her into B as well. She does have pretty good base stats, but because of how her skill is, being a generic plus 30%, the other 6-star AoE casters are much better. When it comes to Lava Altar, This one kind of surprised me because Lava Altar, especially being in the AoE caster branch, you wouldn't really think much of her, but her skill 1 is very underrated. Because she attacks 2 targets, she basically doubles her damage with her skill and gets a range extension. So like on HS9, for an example, you probably were thinking, why did I use Lava Altar instead of just using Dusk the whole time? And that is because Lava Altar with her skill up probably has the highest DPS out of all the AoE casters. Unfortunately though, her skill doesn't really have that great of uptime, so the other 6-star casters, or when it comes to the other AoE casters, she falls behind the AoE casters that I am going to get into. So Dusk, waifu bias aside, she is going into S tier because she is one of the few AoE casters, just like Lava Altar, where her skill 1 isn't complete garbage. With having extra AoE and having like a power strike type skill, she does very well. Probably the best consistent AoE DPS or AoE arts caster. AoE caster that there is. When it comes to these. Okay, the collab AoE caster, Marcel. She's going to S tier as well. She is very unique because of her mana system, with how her skills work and all that. But what really interests me is her skill 1 also heals. So if you don't know how she works, when she's off field, she gains mana. And when she gets full mana, or like she basically gains SP before you deploy her, and then once you deploy her, however much SP that she gained is what she's gonna get for how long she was not deployed. With her mana, she gains increased AoE every single hit. And with her skill 1, she quickly charges, and then she can use that mana to basically make her attacks do the same damage as Dusk every single hit instead of every 4th hit, or yeah, I think it's every 4th hit. So in that sense, Marcel is a better AoE caster than Dusk. But what really interests me, or at least until her mana runs out, but what is really interesting to me is how her healing works, because it is the same scaling as her attack. So that means we have an AoE caster now at Elite 0 level 1 that heals for 800. Tell me how that is not broken. To give you an idea, Shining, the best AoE, or the best single target medic, has 260 attack, and with her skill has 377. So we have an AoE caster that heals double of what Shining does with her skill active. What? What were they thinking? And I mean, she can heal 40 times, so it's like, oh, you quickly activate her skill when an elite enemy shows up and you need that super high healing, and then turn it off when you don't need it. Or in the case of her normal attacks, you activate it when a big rush of enemies comes in, and then you turn it off when you don't need it anymore, and then she still gains like 10% attack as long as she has mana and gets the increased AoE. So, just a bonkers AoE caster there. When it comes to the Blast caster, though, they are surprisingly more usable in comparison to AoE casters, and that is because of their unique range. So, AoE casters, they pretty much only have, like, at Elite 0, because their range is so bad, Blast casters can actually be more usable sometimes. So when it comes to Corsair, I put him into the B tier, and he has a surprisingly really high attack skill, but it stuns him, so that kind of limits his damage. So it's like really high burst damage, but then then stuns himself. Aroma, on the other hand, I also put into B tier. She basically has Ifrit skill 2, but at Elite 0, but her scaling is just not very good. I think it's like 120% attack, which is just pretty disappointing, but she does deal extra damage against aerial enemies, and she gets 2 charges, which she probably will waste one of those charges as soon as a single enemy gets into her range. So I think she's going to be okay, but I would primarily get her because her base skill is really good for Elite 0. When it comes to Ifrit, on the other hand, she's going into the S tier, and that is primarily for her res debuff. Her personal damage, I don't think, is super high in comparison to when you promote her. However, because she decreases the res of all enemies in her range, it allows your other casters to deal much more damage. And because of her long range, she can also be deployed in areas where obviously other casters can't. So like on my SL8 attempt, I used her to decrease the res of Dolly just by being there, and then she was out of harm's way because she was on the other side of the stage. So really good. When it comes to the Phalanx casters, because they have such big AoE, they're actually, or the 5 stars have really big AoE, so Beeswax I'm putting into the B tier. That extra range is actually really underrated, in my opinion, because there are so many stages where I'm like, how can I get enough damage to deal with the stage? And then using Beeswax allows me to cover multiple lanes or deal damage to enemies that other AoE casters just simply couldn't dream of. So definitely has her situations, and she has 450 defense, which is high enough for at least the trash mobs. So that can be very good as well for tanking stuff. Mint, unfortunately, is just Beeswax, but is slightly worse in all the relevant areas. Her skill takes a few seconds longer to charge. She has lower defense, so if she tanks things, she's not as good for that. But because she has the extra range, just like Beeswax, sometimes I use them both. So they're still, she still can be useful. Carnelian, I'm putting into the A tier because she is the only caster, well, really the only ranged unit that can deal a large amount of arts damage, especially, while also being tanky, because of how her skill 1 is. So you let it charge twice to get the charged effect, and she can get like 540 defense, while also, or 560 defense, or whatever it is, while also dealing good arts damage. And sometimes in situations, that extra tankiness while also being able to deal damage is really useful. So I'm putting her into the A tier. One thing to note is that for the 6-star Phalanx casters, unfortunately they only have the same range as bards. So that is one advantage that the lower rarity Phalanx casters have. Alright, Lynn is going into the S tier. She's basically a tanky AoE caster that also slows. And what I mean by that is that even with her skill on, she has 200 defense. A little bit lower than 200 defense. So that means against ranged enemies, like let's just say they have 300 attack or 250 attack, she can survive that where other ranged operators can't. And then it's true AoE, so in some situations she can cover multiple lanes, or that is just useful in general, whereas slash casters can't. So, and on top of that, her skill has a really fast charge, so you can choose when you want her to be tanky, when do you want her to deal damage, and so on. So, very strong caster there. When it comes to the chain casters, okay, I putting it into the C tier. I'm Chaincasters in general are basically, for the most part, better AoE casters, with the exception of the ones that I put up here. With the exception of Lava Altar, Dusk, and Marcel. Chaincasters are generally better because they also slow and they can also hit things outside of their range. Unfortunately, Pudding has really low stats, so she's going into the C tier. Also, Lizzie I'm going to put into the B tier because she just has a generic attack bonus for her skill 1, so unfortunately that isn't very good for a skill 1 for a Chaincaster. When it comes to Ashtini, I'm putting her in, whoops. Where did I put Ashtini here? Accidentally, here we go. Ashtini is going into the A tier because unlike the other Chaincasters, and unlike her promoted self, her skill 1 is actually useful at this level because she is able to hit up to 8 targets, and that can be also very useful. So she kind of, if there's enough enemies, she can kind of like double her damage like every so often with her skill. So that is very good. Passenger. The Godsinger meme, unfortunately, ruined his character for me. Because of how, that eclipses his entire character. But putting that aside, he is basically Provisio except multi-target, so he is in S tier. Okay. Mystic Casters are for nuking things. And that can be very useful. Like in my DV2 video, I used 3 different Mystic Casters in order to kill dangerous enemies before reaching my defenders. So they can be very powerful, doing around 2,000 arts damage with all of their charges. Indigo, I'm putting into the C tier. And unfortunately, all of the Mystic Casters, from Indigo to Ebonholds, function exactly the same. They have the exact same skill 1, except Indigo's has 4-second duration instead of 5 for some reason. But putting that aside, they're basically all exactly the same. So that means whoever has the highest attack is the best. In this case. Without exception. So with that being said, all of the 5 stars are basically the same in terms of attack power. So they're all going into the B tier. Iris has slightly higher attack than the other 2, but it's basically the same. Ebonholds, I'm going to put him into A tier because he has the highest nuking potential, which is good out of all of them. So when it comes to Wormy, she's the only one who can do burn damage. And her skill 1 basically functions the same as Amiya, except it has the burn buildup. And unfortunately for Wormy, burn as an elemental damage type is just not very good in comparison to Necrosis. Because burn does minus 20 res and 7,000 elemental damage, whereas Necrosis does 12,000 true damage. Or 12,000 elemental damage. So you can't convince me that there will be a situation with how much effort it will take, even after Hypergriff releases a burn ritualist, you can't convince me that burn damage will ever be as powerful as Necrosis at this level, anyway. Because how is minus 20 res going to be enough to compensate for the doing 5,000 less true damage? So as a result, Wormy is shorter than Amiya on the tier list. Diamante and also Nymph, the only reason why or the main reason why I use Diamante is to help Arturia to add to the Necrosis buildup with his skill 1. And so he's actually fairly decent at doing that. So let me see. I put Diamante into B tier. Like, adding to the Necrosis bar, getting it filled up even faster, like if there's an elite enemy that I need to kill as soon as possible. On, I forget what the stage was called, but there was one stage where I did use Diamante and Arturia to get rid of jet canisters, and he helped build up the Necrosis bar for that. So, but like the true damage, like after the Necrosis pops, is, I don't really focus on that. But he's pretty good at doing that role. Now, when it comes to Nymph, she's basically Diamante with higher attack and is shorter. So she's going into the A tier. When it comes to medics, Hibiscus is going into the useless tier because her stats are just not good enough. Ansel is going into the D tier because his range extension, but that's about it. Cicero, Coco can be happy that she is going into the C tier because she actually has pretty good attack, all things considered. Unfortunately, she has the misfortune of being a 4-star medic, which means she only gets plus 10% attack with level 1 skills, which is garbage. Myrrh, where did I put Myrrh? I put Myrrh into B tier. Sometimes I use Myrrh because of her multi-target. Like if I need to heal 2 targets, she is pretty good for that. Gaviel, regular Gaviel, I put her into C tier as well. She's a little bit tankier, and her skill is pretty decent as like a consistent heal, but her base attack is really low. So good skill, low attack. Warfarin, I'm putting it into B tier. The percentage healing is pretty much only relevant like on crushers, and even then, because of how her skill works, she's decent, but she doesn't stand out as much as she should because of the low HP pool of level 1 operators. Folanik is pretty much a cuter version of Ansel, so pretty much only for her range extension, and her skill actually does last quite a while with higher base attack. But unfortunately, that's pretty much the only thing I would use her for, because the other single target medics heal for so much more. 2A, I am putting into A tier. I used to use her primarily as my single target medic because she has that shield and fast charging skill. And that made it so that she was a very good consistent healer, and it would mitigate some of the damage. And Silence is also going into A tier, as well as Silence. So to basically explain these three, is that 2A has like the fast charging skill, consistent heal. Silence has the longer duration, like burst heal, and then Shining has the highest burst healing potential. She also adds plus 20 to defense, which lowers the healing pressure a little bit, and her skill heals the most, but it only lasts for 20 seconds, whereas Silence lasts for 30 seconds, so there are some times where Silence's skill, with that longer duration, is actually more useful than Shining's burst healing. When it comes to Lancet 2, I'm also putting her into A tier, because just like with Castle 3, if I have an extra squad slot, she's just extra healing. So when it comes to the medics, or single target medics specifically, or medics in general, really, it is the most balanced class out of them all, because pretty much all of them have their upsides and downsides as long as it's like the 5 and 6 stars, because most of the 4 stars, because of their lower stats, and also Hypergriff gave them garbage level 1 skills, like in the case of Cicero, when it comes to 5-star and higher, they're actually very well balanced. Calcid is unique in that regard, however, that she's going to be in the S tier because of Monster, pretty much. Monster is basically a single target crusher with defense. So if you need something to tank hits, she can do that. And also she has the range of Wandering Medic, so even though her healing is not very good, her extra range can give her extra utility on top of having Monster. Perfumer. Perfumer is going into the D tier. And Perfumer has given me so much pain and suffering for 4-7. Because she's a 4-star just like Cicero, her skill only gives plus 10% attack. And her skill, and her base attack is only 142. Which means I had to raw eye on that with the burning tiles. And let me tell you, that was not a fun experience. And if I had the 5-star, if I had the higher rarity medics, 4-7 would have been much easier. Speaking of, Talopsis, putting her into B tier. She's a solid AoE medic, as you'd expect, with plus 40% attack. She does pretty well in the situations where I need an AoE medic. Speaking of Breeze, Jack can be happy. Well, if he ever watches this, Jack, I'm putting her in the same tier as Talopsis, and the reason is that Breeze, even though that she has less attack than Talopsis, she has one trick up her sleeve, and that is her skill resets her auto attack. And that was something that I forgot to mention with Pinecone, is that Pinecone, her skill resets her auto attack. Same thing with Executor. And because it resets her auto attack, you can do a quick heal of around 400 with her regular attack, and then quickly activating her skill. And sometimes that can be very useful. And most of the time when I need an AoE medic, healing 2 targets is pretty much what I need, so her skill isn't, downside isn't as big of a deal. And she has higher HP than Talopsis, so if she's tanking hits, that can be useful as well. Generally speaking, however, I like the consistency of being able to heal 3 targets with Talopsis. So I use her over Breeze, but Breeze does have her advantages in comparison because of that resetting her auto attack. Nightingale, on the other hand, however, is straight up the best AoE medic by a lot. And she is, with Calcit, is the only medic that I am putting in S tier. And that is mostly because of her competition. She has 202 attack, and she gives all of your operators in her attack range 5 extra res. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're at this level, there are times where any source of damage mitigation is massive. So, if you think about it, Talopsis, going from 177 attack with Talopsis to 202 with Nightingale is huge. So that is why she's going into the S tier. Whereas Shining, on the other hand, kind of trades blows, so to speak, with her with her competition. Paprika, Reiru's favorite character, I am putting into the B tier. There are times where her extra chaining adds extra range, which can be useful, and because of how her attack and everything goes, if I need a little bit of healing on a target, but I need her to focus healing on a defender or something. So let's just say the defender with the taking the most damage gets the biggest heal, being the first heal, but then I need just a little bit of healing to an operator on the side, like let's just say like Lynn for an example. She can heal the defender for 200 and then 150 to the next chain, and if there's a third operator, it's like 125 or something. So she has her moments. When it comes to Papyrus in Pepe's event, she's kind of like a more consistent version of Paprika. What I mean by that is her skill is a fast charge skill that adds like extra barrier or something like that. So I think like if you just want like a consistent AFK chain medic, she can be good. Whereas Paprika is has that attack speed skill, which is more of a burst. Alright. When it comes to therapists, I have Pure Stream on the D tier. She can heal all the targets in her range, but her attack at this level is just garbage. I think it's like 190. So it's just not very good, especially when you consider that I don't have access to modules, so she loses 20% of her attack when she uses that further range. Unfortunately for Whisper Rain, her skill 1 is terrible. You get 1 second of status resistance after like 5 heals. It's like 5 SP offensively, so, and she doesn't have like attack scaling with that heal, so it's just terrible. Ceylon is decent. Yeah, I put her into B tier. She's like the best, probably the best therapist, in all honesty. Lumen is also good. I'm putting Lumen into B tier as well. He does the AoE, but like for single target, Ceylon is better because of how her skill works. Chestnut I'm also putting into B tier. He resets his auto attack with his skill, so that can also be useful. I primarily use Wandering Medics for elemental damage, obviously, but also they have extra range, so that can be useful. Honeyberry and Mulberry I'm also all putting into B tier. Honeyberry heals 2 targets, which can be useful, and Mulberry increases the heal that she does with her skill. Harold has a duration skill, and I also put him into B tier, so he's just kind of like, if you want a duration like burst kind of heal in there instead of like Mulberry, for an example, he can be good. When it comes to Alter, I primarily use Alter for her extra range, like with the other Wandering Medics, but she also heals 2 targets once her skill activates. And I'm putting her into the A tier, and if her skill gave her extra attack, or her skill didn't take so long to charge, I would have put her into S tier, but her skill takes 80 seconds to charge, and even with her cheap SP cost, that sometimes is just feels way too long. So when she's up, she's good, but outside of that, she can struggle a little bit. When it comes to the Incantation Medics, they do a little bit of damage and healing. I put both Hibiscus Altar and Vandella into the B tier. I did the math, and unfortunately Vandella is worse than Hibiscus overall. She does like 10% less healing over her skill cycle plus, with her lower base attack plus her skill cycle and everything, but she does gain attack speed, which is sometimes useful. But overall, Hibiscus Altar is unfortunately just a little bit better than Vandella. Vandella does get extra HP though, so that is sometimes useful, but Hibiscus already has a decent amount of HP anyway. With Reed Alter being the 6-star, I am putting her into the A tier. She gets attack speed with her skill and attack. So she's basically like Hibiscus with attack speed. And I think she has a little bit higher defense. In case she needs to tank a hit or something. Alright, we're finally onto supporters. This is getting to be a long video. Okay, Orchid has attack speed, so I'm putting her into D. With her slowing, she just barely gets into D tier. I'm putting Earth Spirit into useless tier because I would rather have Orchid's attack speed because of how low their stats are. That is more relevant. When it comes to Glaucus, and Glaucus, Estina, Angelina, and Suzerain, they are all going into the B tier. They kind of all do... They're all pretty effective for what they're used for slowing enemies, obviously. So when it comes to these three, like Glaucus does the multi-target, has extra max HP, which can be useful. Estina has the highest slow uptime with her skill, so kind of like an Angelina S2, but at Elite 0. Angelina is kind of like a core caster who can also slow, in that sense, like she's more focused on damage. Suzerain has a little bit of attack speed, but it's also auto-activate, so I guess kind of like an AFK a little bit, but her attack speed, it's like +5 attack speed, I think it is. So Angelina is probably better than Suzerain at this level. But there is one slow supporter that is above the group, and that is Provizio. And that is because she does double damage on when she charges her skill. Her next attack does 200% attack, and it extends the duration of her slow. Which means she kind of can permanently slow an enemy for about 2 seconds, like with the charge and her auto attack. So she is the best one of the bunch there. When it comes to Grandbuds, she's kind of like Provizio, except focusing on multi-target and without the slow extension. And unfortunately, because of that, I put her into the C tier because I feel like, number one, she's probably going to waste her charge against a single enemy most of the time anyway, and her attack scaling just isn't very good in comparison. Like, Provizio has 200%, and then Grainbuds only has 110%. So unfortunately, I'm putting Grainbuds into C tier. Podenko also goes into C tier. She's kind of like the OG Abjurer, where with her skill she heals allies instead of attacking. But she also slows, so she's kind of like a better Abjurer in that way. But I don't think she has that great of uptime either. But she had her moment in CC11, for an example. Now onto the why is Sukunogi right there? Get out of here. You're not here yet. The Hexers. When it comes to Chimera, I put her into C tier. She can kind of be like, most of these Hexers are kind of like weaker casters, but are also cheap at the same time. So if it's like really tight on DP and I just need something down to deal with the beginning rush of enemies, they can fulfill that role. So I am putting Chimera in C tier. She has that fragile and unlimited duration going for her. So when it comes to Premnix, I'm also putting her into C tier. Unfortunately, her skill has only 10-second duration, I think it is. So C tier might be a bit generous, but that is where I'm putting her for now. Lucia, I'm also putting it into C tier. She can hit 4 enemies with her skill, which is really, really good. Unfortunately, she doesn't have very good scaling, and it takes like 7 7 SP in order for her to use that skill with offensive recovery, so C tier is the best I can do for her. Gnosis, on the other hand, is not limited like the other Hexers by their fairly mediocre skills, and he has auto recovery, fast charging, double hit. So he is going to be in the B tier. So like I said, he's pretty much like a cheaper caster. But out of these Hexers, he is by far the best in my opinion. Roberta, I would pretty much only use her for her devices, for her shield, and extra defense. But unfortunately that, I'm putting her into C tier. Unfortunately that niche has pretty much never has come up yet. For HS9, before I thought of Sculptor, I actually use Roberta as well as Waifu in order to try to tank the boss on HS9 because of he would one-shot Jessica if not for those buffs/debuffs. But besides that, I haven't really came to a stage where I would think about using her. So she has potential, but it's a niche that I don't really need, surprisingly, or at least not enough to justify her using up a squad slot. Or a deploy slot, like for a medic, for an example. When it comes to Winflet, I also put him into C. He can do some AoE damage, and also his devices add a little bit of attack, but he doesn't have very high defense, and his devices I think only do 5% attack, so C is the best I can do for him. When it comes to Stainless, I'm putting him into B tier because he is pretty much the only good buffer when it comes to increasing attack, unfortunately, and it's unlimited duration. But at the same time, the problem is that realistically speaking, what would I rather have? Would I rather have Stainless or another operator that will deal damage? And that's kind of the problem, and why I haven't really been using him. Because realistically speaking, like, let's just say he buffs Golden Glow. So he gives Golden Glow 12% attack. Well, that's not going to be enough to, like, if I was able to use Rock with Golden Glow, so he also has potential, and I'm putting him into B tier, but realistically speaking, it's hard to justify putting him on the team at this level, if that makes sense. I mean, maybe once Ulpian comes out, I'll use Stainless with him, and then he can do 1,500 skill usages with his skill. Abjurers. So Sukunogi, I'm putting her into C tier. She reveals Invis, but like I said with Totter, that isn't really a niche that's that useful for me. Other than that, she has really bad uptime, and the problem with Abjurers in general is that they have very low attack, like even worse than Hexers. So it's like they have basically the same attack as Incantation Medics. So you have to choose. Do you want an extremely bad caster, or do you want a really good medic? Because when they activate their skills, because of their attack speed, they actually are some of the best healing potential that I can get. But because of their low uptime and their garbage attack outside of that, it's hard to justify using them. They're like super high potential, but realistically speaking, they're just not very good. So because of that, I'm putting what is going on? Gray, where did I put? Okay, dear, where did silence go? Oops. Did I accidentally put... Okay, there we go. I'm putting them all into C tier. Like, Silence Altar has probably, like, the highest healing outside of Marcel here. But again, her attack, like, outside of her skill, she does pretty bad arts damage. So it's hard to use. With that being said, Corcus is going all the way into A tier because, unlike the other Abjurers, her skill is unlimited duration. So instead of having like this mishmash of being a terrible caster and sometimes the best medic, Corcus can dedicate herself to being the best medic. And to give you an idea, she basically heals she heals more than Shining does outside of Shining's skill. So as like an unlimited duration and also only 10 DP cost operator, she can be very good. Unfortunately though, you still have to wait 54 seconds for her skill to charge, so there is that downside, keeping her from S tier, but she's still very good and the best one of the bunch there. Alright, getting into Bards. U Official I'm putting into B because she has that AoE stun, and sometimes that is useful for the low altitude hovering enemies as well as like stalling a group of enemies. I don't really use her personally, but my friend Cartel used her on like ZT7, and man, he was a genius when he did his ZT7 clear. I mean, mine was good, but putting that aside, his clear was amazing as well. When he showed that to me, and he used her to stall some enemies. When it comes to Sora, I'm putting her into C. She has extended range and she puts enemies asleep, so she has like that potential, but unfortunately for Bards, they have terrible range at Elite 0, so they're really hard to use, and they have worse healing than AoE medics when they're off skill by a lot. But when they activate their skill, then they actually heal a pretty good amount, actually. So most of the time, Bards I would only use to heal unhealable operators such as Reapers and Juggernaut defenders like Mudrock, La Pluma for an example. But unfortunately, Sora I'm going to put into C tier. Heidi, on the other hand, I'm putting her into A tier. Heidi is the only Bard at Elite 0 that does an inspiration for attack, at least as of right now. So, I currently do not have her, because I obviously haven't gotten to Chapter 10 yet on this account. But she gives, I think it was 80 attack with her skill 1. To give you an idea, Golden Glow only has 200 attack. Or, yeah, 200 something attack. So having plus 80 to that gives her like plus 40% extra attack. Unfortunately though, Golden Glow would be the main use case for using Heidi. Because, for an example, other operators that have like 400, 80 is only 20%. But in the case of using with mech casters, just like on my main account, I usually use Sculptor S2 with Golden Glow, and that massively increases her damage. So this is the only case where Heidi does the inspiration, or Bards do an inspiration, and that with Golden Glow can be very powerful. So I'm putting her into A tier for that potential synergy. And also, she would obviously help medics and whatnot. Also, because medics don't have super high attack either. But yeah, overall, really good if I actually could unlock her. When it comes to Scotty Alter, I'm putting her into A tier as well. And that is because, just like Nightmare, her niche doesn't come up very often, but the thing that she can do is that she can mitigate the damage that a defender takes. And HS9 was the perfect example for that, where the boss would one-shot Jessica Alter, if I didn't debuff it in some way, or in the case of Sculptor, she was able to take some of that damage from Jessica in order to let her survive, as well as do a bunch of healing as well. So, very, very niche operator, but also the effect is very powerful. And also, just like the other bards, she can heal the normally unhealable operators. Sylvalite Eterna, playable Theresa, unfortunately is just overall worse compared to Scotty Alter, even with her skill. She has one of those unlimited duration skills as her skill 1 that increase the effect of her trait for her healing. Unfortunately, though, her attack is quite a bit lower from Scotty Alter, so Scotty Alter basically heals the same as Sylvalite Eterna, even when her skill is active. And Scotty Alter has, another skill that also increases her healing, so she's just kind of overall just worse in comparison. But I would say she's probably better than Sora, but it's hard to say. But overall, Scotty Alter, now that I have her, she's probably like the only bard that I would use at this point for anything. Valarquin. I did an entire video on Valarquin talking about my disappointment about how bad her skill 1 is. With that being said, however, unlike Diamante and Nymph, her necrosis application is based on her attack rather than the arts damage they deal. So Diamante and Nymph, if they're attacking a 50 res enemy, they only add to the necrosis buildup by half the normal amount. So that is something that, even though her skill is garbage, she does have, in a very extreme use case, of using with Arturia. But realistically speaking, I'm probably never going to use her. But because of that just very small use case, like against Patriot or something, with extremely high res, and needing necrosis as much as possible, I'm putting her into D tier. Barely. Realistically, she should probably be in the useless tier, but I'm putting her into D as of right now. As for Arturia, she is broken. In basically... Okay. How do I describe this? So necrosis does 12,000 true damage effectively, and she can apply it in around 20 seconds at Elite 0 level 1. So that means if there's an elite enemy with like an isolated elite enemy and she is able to focus on it, she will kill that elite enemy in probably 30 seconds. So that is completely broken. On the other, and also on top of that, when necrosis is applied, it does the minus 50% attack debuff, so that if an elite enemy does, like, and tanking, a defender tanking an elite enemy, she basically makes it so it's no longer a threat to the defender anymore, because of how massive that 50% damage attack reduction is. So, in my personal opinion, I think she is too broken, and she's not like Milzis, where Milzis has clear downsides, whereas Arturia, as long as the elite enemy is isolated, and sometimes even if they aren't, as long as she can apply that necrosis, she just does a ridiculous amount, and she has made so many stages possible for me. At the stage where I'm at, like I definitely would not have gotten as far in like Hero People Sows, like just as a prime example, in the EX stages without Virtuosa. And on top of that, she only costs 14 DP compared to Golden Glow, who costs 20, and so on. So not only can she kill elites fast, but she's also very DP efficient when that is relevant. Phonar, is the new robot with Chapter 14, I think it is, and I'm putting her into A tier. She's basically Valarquin, but actually good. At this level. She applies Necrosis with every attack, although I don't think she can apply Necrosis by herself. I think you need to level her up and have potentials in order to apply Necrosis by herself. But if I'm using her with Virtuosa, she applies it faster, at least when her talent is active. But the most important thing about Fonar is, when you think about it, she is a caster, albeit a very weak caster, but a source of arts damage that doesn't take up deployment slots. So that is what I am most excited for Fonar, is that just having that extra bit of damage available. Arts damage specifically. Okay, now getting into the summoners, I put D-Color in D just because for summoners I usually use them as fast redeploys. Use their summons as extra fast redeploys because they only have, I think, a 10-second redeployment time. So I use them when I don't have enough squad space for other fast redeploys, or I need fast redeploys. So Deep Color is in D because of how weak her summons are at this level. When it comes to Scene, I put her into C tier. She can reveal invis enemies, so she kind of makes Totter not useful because she can put down a summon that reveals enemies. And also with Ray's event, I was able to reveal invis enemies that are sleeping. So that is one advantage that it has in Near Light specifically, is that you can reveal the sleeping knights without actually activating them or waking them up. Unfortunately, though, because her niche is just not, like I said, is very rarely useful, C tier is kind of all that I can do for that. Mayor, on the other hand, I am putting her into B tier because she has stronger summons and higher attack than Scene. So that gives her a little bit of an edge there. Sand Reckoner, I'm putting him, pretty sure it's a him, into D tier, because Sand Reckoner, his summons are terrible. They do arts damage. It's kind of like Ling's S2, but on a 5-star, and with terrible stats. So I just don't see how... I don't see a situation where I would use him over just using a caster, in my personal opinion. So I'm putting him into D tier. When it comes to Magellan is going straight into S tier as well. With Virtuosa. Because Magellan is the queen of crowd control. She can bind in an AoE. In her attack range, she can also do that with her summons. But one thing that is underrated as well is that her summons are actually fairly tanky and don't block anything. So what that means is that on multiple stages that I've done, like ZT9 is a good example of that, where I can use her summons as tanks. Because they have 1,000 HP, which is fairly good, all things considered. So, on top of her insane crowd control, being able to mitigate damage with her summons is very good. As for Ling, I mean, are any of you surprised? She's going into S tier as well. And that is because Ling, by herself, makes impossible stages possible because of how strong her summons are. To give you an idea of how strong her summons are, they're basically Salem, which I put into C tier. Basically Salem, with more HP, only blocks one enemy, which is an advantage. And just like Salem, does arts damage with Ling skill active. However, one thing I do want to say is that because of how strong Ling is, I kind of have a prejudice against Ling in using her because I think she's too broken. But on the few times that I have used Ling, it is very easy to run out of summons if you use them, if you don't use them intelligently. Unlike when her Elite 2 version, you can just kind of, use her summons wherever you want. So one thing I want to say about Ling is that even with how powerful she is, unlike her E2 version, she isn't an I win button. And so even though I don't want to use Ling, Cartel, for an example, my friend, he is able to use Ling very well, where I am awful at using Ling because I rarely use Ling because I don't want to use Ling because I think she is so overpowered. But with that being said, she's also not an I win button. You actually need to know what you're doing, and I kind of like that, in a way. Alright, so we're getting to the final stretch finally. This is going to be such a long video. Okay, Specialist. All of the pullers. Let me just get the right page here. Alright. When it comes to pullers and pushers, pretty much the only reason why I would use pullers or pushers is to pull or push things. So most of them are going into the D tier. So Snow Sant, Almond, Rope are going into D tier. I did put Cliff Art and Glaudia into C tier, and that's because Cliff Art can kind of act like an instructor that also deals arts damage, and Glaudia has high enough stats to be usable, to be just a little bit better than other pullers, but they're still not great. Sha, I'm putting into D tier, as well as Enforcer and Feeder. So one thing I do want to point out, if you are new to the game, in the early stages of Arknights, you can use pullers and pushers as tanky ranged Centurions, because they can go on, or pushers for an example. I use Feeder because they have higher defense compared to other ranged units, and they can be placed on high tiles, so that can be useful. So take advantage of that when you have Sha, for an example. Weedy I put into C tier. She's just a little bit better than the other pushers, and her skill also allows her to be at least decent. And also the stun. She stuns with her pushes, which can be good as well. Ethan... Where did I put Ethan? Ethan single-handedly trivializes any event that has enemies that require a certain amount of hits to be killed. So, like what the Firelight casts and Invitation to Wine, all those enemies that take a certain amount of hits, with his skill 1, he trivializes all of that. Unfortunately, outside of those situations, his damage isn't super high. So if it wasn't for those situations, he would probably be in C tier. Manticore I put into C. The movement speed reduction that she has just isn't really high enough for me to really consider using her. Unfortunately, I mean, 23% is just, I don't know. That's like almost, I mean, it can be useful, but just not enough to really justify using over a slow supporter. And the other ambushers deal so much more damage. Getting into the ones, the 6-star ones especially, to use her specifically. Carrara, yeah, I put her into C tier as well. Her skill is more focused on damage and doing arts damage. It sounds good, but it's offensive recovery on an ambusher, so yeah. Mizuki, on the other hand, he has an auto recovery skill, and he has really high damage, so I'm putting her, him, into A tier. Because he can do like 900 attack with a skill 1, and being an AoE melee unit, it can be pretty useful. So I think he's really good. Escalon is kind of like a 6-star Manticore with having more slow and also focusing on arts damage. So I'm putting her into A tier as well. All right, Tin Man. Where did I put Tin Man? I thought I put him like in like B tier. But I don't see him on my list actually. I think he's more of a C tier operator, and that is because he does do the attack reduction, which is good. And he does have a pretty unique range, but his attack oh yeah, and his skill does arch damage, but I don't know. I just don't think he's super amazing. So he might be in B tier. I thought for sure that I had him on my list, but for now I'm going to put him into C tier without personal experience of using him yet. I think that's about as high as I can go. So the debuff and the little bit of arts damage, he might be good, but I don't know. Kazumaru, on the other hand, that I have used, I'm putting her into A tier. Doll Keepers in general are very powerful, actually. Because they effectively have 2 health bars, and as long as there isn't ranged enemies, they're basically free damage, kind of like single target ambushers in that sense. And Kazumaru does like 700 attack with her skill 1, so when she's not in her doll form, she can do quite a lot of damage even outside of that. And then she does that like arts damage AoE attack when she switches as well. Benna, when she switched to her doll, she does arts damage. So it's like Kazumaru is the physical damage version, and Benna is the arts damage. So both very powerful. Iana, I'm putting into B tier. She does reveal Invis, and is a lot better at that niche compared to other Invis reveal, because she does a lot more damage, so she doesn't feel like a burden on the team. If, like, for an example, for Scene, if I'm only using Scene to reveal invisible enemies, it feels like she's a burden because she's such a weak caster in a sense, and her summons aren't that great. Where Iana, she can do so much more damage while also revealing the invis enemy. And also, she just is kind of like she's like very much so like a single target ambusher. Unfortunately though, because she doesn't effectively have HP in her original form, because she switches as soon as she's hit, she loses the utility of blocking things for a little bit and like soaking up damage for the defender, unfortunately. So I'm putting her into B tier, but has quite a bit of potential with how she works. I like her kit overall. Verdant is basically Kazumaru without a skill. Straight up. His skill 1 like just doesn't do anything at this level. I mean, 5 res, seriously. And on top of that, like I said, Kazumaru does a lot of damage, and Verdant like has no offensive skills at this level, and his extra 10% HP is like compensating for his 4-star stats. So but even with that being said though, because of how strong Doll Keepers are, in my experience, I'm still putting him into the C tier. So definitely the weakest one for that. And overall. When it comes to Spectre Alter, I'm also putting her into A tier as well. She does AoE arts damage when she's switched to her doll, so she's kind of like Benna, but AoE, with less single target damage, because her scaling on her AoE damage is pretty low at this level. But her skill 1 is actually very interesting, and she can get fairly high attack with it as well. So, very interesting operator, but I don't have her on my level 1 account, and Casimiro is... well, they're definitely on par with each other. I would say Casimiro is probably more consistent, though. I don't know. I would definitely need to test Spectre Alter out, but definitely A tier. Okay, so with the fast redeploys, or not so fast redeploys in the terms of Thermal here, I'm putting Thermal into B tier. He's basically free damage, just like Castle, except I think Castle is just better overall with his 10% buff. Plus, also, Castle has a decent amount of HP, so he can tank a few things, whereas Thermal immediately explodes. And his fragile effect, I think it's only 8% without potentials, so it's hard to justify using him. Like Castle 3, I mean, is already hard to use because of how I build my squads, and he's just better. Okay, for the actual fast redeploys, Gravel is going straight into S tier. She gets a lot of defense with her skill 1, and she has the highest HP out of the fast redeploy options. And speaking of fast redeploys, there are many stages where I need to cycle fast redeploys just because of the stat difference, especially for bosses. So Gravel is also the cheapest one, which also helps with that. Project Red, on the other hand, I'm putting her into A tier. Still pretty good, but her survivability is pretty bad, though. All things considered, she only gets 700 HP, and her defense is not very good, so she's kind of like a decent DPS fast redeploy, but especially now that I have Texas Alter, she's kind of a 6-star version of Project Red. So, and her dodge is just not that useful either. I mean, you'll get the lucky dodge, but that is not something I rely on. So it's still pretty good, but I'm putting her into A tier. So Kafka, I'm putting her into S tier as well. Wait a minute. There we go. And that is because Kafka is the best crowd control that you can get for a fast redeploy. Well, pretty much in general. Like, Kafka allows you to do so many things with those 5 seconds of sleep. It allows you to let your medics heal your defender. It allows you to stall enemies. You know, and also she has a very high amount of HP for some reason. So she can tank a few hits, even after the sleep is over, even though that I usually retreat her immediately, because I mostly use her for the sleep duration. But for her crowd control is very powerful, and like I said with Yurato, with that combo she can enable some funny things. So definitely S tier. Waifu, I keep grabbing the wrong thing. Where did Waifu go? Here we go. So for Waifu, I am putting her into A tier. She's kind of similar to Project Red. She has a little bit higher defense for tankability, as well as the attack debuff. But she actually has less than 700 HP. So if she's trying to tank arts damage and she can't get that debuff off, she would get one shot, unlike Project Red and Gravel and Kafka. But her debuff can be useful, and and is quite good, just like Project Red is. So when it comes to Texas Alter, I keep grabbing the wrong thing. Sorry. Where did Texas go? Yeah, where did... I hate it when this happens. Okay, that is in B. Where did... Well, regardless, as soon as I find her portrait, wherever that ended up, she's going into the S tier. Like I said, she's basically a 6-star Project Red. And she isn't broken at this level. And then we'll get to Yato in a second. So yeah, Texas Alter is basically a logical progression, in my opinion, of Project Red. She trades the dodge for just a little bit more damage plus arts damage. And she's the only source of arts damage for the fast redeploys. So, well, Yato does a tiny bit, but it's not really relevant. So she is really good. Yato Alter, on the other hand, is the single highest physical damage dealer for Elite 0 level 1 against 0 defense. And it's actually insane how high the DPS Yato Alter has. And so she's one of those collab operators that is bonkers broken, in my opinion. On the other hand, she is also necessary for some stage gimmicks, like the Galetto stops in Guide Ahead and the soda bottle things in So Long Adele. I pretty much need to use Yato Alter because for whatever reason, Hypergriff gave them super high HP. So Yato Alter is one of the only operators who can quickly destroy the soda bottles as well as take over the Galetto stops, just because of how much HP they have, even though that they have 0 defense and res. But at the same time, if the enemies... before I finish off here, Yato Alter has higher DPS than Texas Alter until like 200 defense. And Yato Alter only has 300 attack. So that definitely tells you how insane her damage can be. But yeah, as soon as enemies do have close to her attack and defense, then she does nothing. So Phantom I'm putting into B tier. Sometimes his physical damage shield is useful, but very rarely. Generally speaking, he's just a worse gravel, like in every situation. I used him in MB8, like his physical shield was relevant, but generally speaking, he is by far the weakest fast redeploy, even at Elite 0 level 1, and he's only as high as B tier is because of how strong fast redeploys are in general, for this niche. Jay, I'm putting into B tier. I pretty much only use him for silence. And I think Texas Alter... Oh yeah, that was the other thing about Texas Alter. She can silence as well. I think these two, as well as Blitz, are the only operators who can silence. So that is very useful for Saltafreya Navis, for an example. And also merchants, generally speaking. They have really high HP and defense for fast redeploys, but they also eat your DP. Because I obviously don't have access to his module at this level. So most of the time, I only use them if my other fast redeploys can't tank them, or I need J silence. So Mr. Nothing is also going into B tier. He is one of those operators that also really surprised me because his skill 1 gives him 2 block, and that is surprisingly very useful. Because I don't have access to Yato at this level, or The regular Yato doesn't have her fast redeploy talent, so Mr. Nothing is the closest thing I have to that. So with this 2-block, he can be pretty good. Lee, where did I put Lee? Lee I put into C tier because unlike Jay and Mr. Nothing, he's just kind of like Jay with higher stats but without the silence. And the silence is basically what makes Jay, for me personally, as powerful as he is. When it comes to Swire Alter, so when talking about Gummy, like I said, she heals more than Gummy. She's a fast redeploy that heals. And that is insane in terms of utility, because she also heals a good amount as well, which is surprising. I thought I put Swire Alt on. Yeah, A tier. So she heals basically almost as much as like Saria, like 80% or so of how much Silence heals, and yet because she's a fast redeploy, you can put her basically anywhere in the map and change her position very easily in comparison to a medic defender can. And she is fairly tanky as well, because she is a merchant. So because of that unmatched utility that no other operator can really do her niche, I'm putting her into A tier. Definitely the strongest merchant in my personal opinion. When it comes to the geeks, why are they called geeks? The specialists. Spear is going into D tier. Her skill 1 in combination with her stun can potentially be useful, but I don't see myself using her personally. Ak is just like Spira, except he can heal himself and also has better stats. So with his stun and everything, and because he can heal himself, I'm putting him into the C tier. Still not great, but I don't know. Maybe the stun will be amazing for the low altitude hovering enemies. Alright, Robin. Now for the Trap Masters last. Okay, Robin I have into B tier. And that is because she binds with her skill 1. She can stall things. And she does okay damage at around 500. But primarily to stall things can be very powerful. Because like I said, the crowd control options are very limited. For Elite 0 level 1. So Frost, kind of the same thing. I put her into B tier. She stuns instead of binds, which is sometimes more useful, but it's also for 1 second instead of 1.5 seconds. So I'm putting those two in the same tier. Ella, on the other hand, I am also putting into B tier, actually. She's basically an on-demand AoE slow, which is nice. However, that's all she does, and her mines take a while to come back. So I don't think she's that amazing, but she's okay. She has utility that no other operator can do, but I just don't think she's super strong at this level. Loey from the future here, and now that I have had a chance to use Ella a bit in CC2 Underdawn, she is much better than I expected. Generally speaking, I would say Magellan is better just because of how Magellan binds with her summons work, but Ella does provide a similar effect without relying on summons like outside of her range like Magellan does. So I am moving her, instead of being in B tier, as you see in this video and at the end, I am moving her to A tier. I will be putting a pinned comment under this video saying any changes that I make to this tier list, if my opinions change on any of them, and also future operators that are announced on CN will also be down there. So if you're curious about future operators, do look down there as well if you make it this far. Do not forget Dorothy. Dorothy. I'm putting Dorothy into A tier. She has defense reduction, and she has kind of I think she has the high. I think Ella has slightly higher attack, but she has good attack by herself, and her mines or traps actually deal really good damage and has defense reduction. So that is very powerful. And because she has 340 attack, or 350 or so, she is better. She is a better marksman sniper than most marksman snipers. But defense reduction is pretty rare. And most of the operators that do have defense reduction are not really that great otherwise. So Dorothy, with that and her mine damage, I'm putting her there. So that is every single operator. Let me see if I can find Texas. Where did Texas go? Yeah, where did she end up? Seriously, she just disappeared, I guess. But yeah, that is my overall tier list. So Texas Salter is in S tier if I can find her somewhere. I really want to find her by the time I finish this video. So that is my overall tier list of every single operator and my opinion of them, and why they stand, and why some operators will stand out more otherwise. So with how with the extreme stats of E0 level 1, pretty much for me to use an operator, they need to be like B tier or higher, just because when you're at this low of stats, every best option for a specific job is not only preferred, but many times necessary. So, unfortunately, like C and especially D, with very, very niche use cases, you're not really going to see me use these operators. Seriously, where did Texas go? Please, before I end it here. But anyway, yeah. I can't find her. Maybe I'm blind. So with that is hopefully you enjoyed me going through every operator. I know this is going to be a very long video, but yeah. So that hopefully my explanations gave you a bit of insight on my thought process when it comes to clearing these Elite 0 level 1 stages. Okay, I finally found Texas Salter, so she is in the right spot now. And also, I found that Reed ended up in the wrong spot accidentally. So this is the full list. So thanks for watching.